Clara's sleek black sedan glided through the bustling streets of the city, her fingers tapping rhythmically on the steering wheel, lost in thought. The morning had been nothing short of chaotic. The corporate world, with its endless meetings and relentless deadlines, never gave her a moment to breathe. She was a woman in control, meticulously organized and impeccably put together. Everything in her life was designed to fit her standards, perfectly calculated, perfectly executed. Or at least, that was the facade she carefully maintained. But as the sound of the car's engine sputtering and jerking into silence filled her ears, Clara felt a sinking feeling in the pit of her stomach. The car lurched forward, but it didn't move with the smooth hum she was used to. She pressed down harder on the accelerator, but the car seemed to protest, the engine giving a final rattle before it came to a complete stop in the middle of the street. She swore under her breath, her mind already racing through a list of things to do: call a tow truck, find a nearby mechanic, and somehow avoid the embarrassment of being stranded in the heart of the city. But none of that would be easy, especially not in the middle of the day, with the city's fast-paced traffic whizzing by her. Clara took a deep breath, forcing herself to stay calm. She glanced around, her eyes scanning for any signs of a nearby repair shop, but the street was unfamiliar. There were no garages or mechanics in sight. She quickly grabbed her phone and tried calling for roadside assistance, but her signal was weak, dropping in and out as the minutes passed. Her patience was wearing thin. The time was slipping away, and she had an important meeting with a potential client in less than an hour. Her mind flashed to the presentation, to the big deal she was hoping to land. The pressure was mounting, and this interruption, this minor inconvenience, was threatening to derail everything. That's when she saw him. From the corner of her eye, she noticed a man walking toward her. He was tall, broad-shouldered, and wearing the kind of work clothes that told her he was a mechanic. A faded pair of overalls, stained with grease, hung loosely from his frame. He had a no-nonsense look about him, his face serious, but not unfriendly. But something about him made Clara uneasy. She felt a flicker of hesitation. He was coming closer now, his heavy boots thudding against the pavement with a deliberate rhythm. He was calm, composed, his steps measured. And yet, Clara couldn't shake the nagging feeling that something was off about him. Maybe it was his unkempt appearance, or maybe it was the way he was walking toward her as if he already knew what was wrong with her car. When he reached her window, Clara couldn't help but roll it down just a little, enough to speak to him but not enough to let him too close. "You need help?" he asked, his voice smooth, steady. Clara raised an eyebrow, a little startled by the directness. "No, I'm fine. Thanks." She didn't even want to look at him for too long, not wanting to make eye contact. She had been taught not to engage with strangers, especially those who looked like they were just trying to make a quick buck. "I'm the mechanic they sent out," he continued, his tone unfazed by her initial coldness. "The car's not going anywhere. You need someone to take a look." Clara hesitated. She knew he was right, but she also wasn't ready to let a stranger into her world. There were 100 other things she could be doing right now, and she certainly didn't have time to wait for a mechanic to do whatever it was he needed to do. She had a reputation to uphold, and she was the type of person who didn't waste time. "No thanks," she said curtly. "I'll just call someone else." The mechanic stood there for a moment, as if considering her words, before giving a simple nod. "All right. But you should know, it'll be hard to get another tow truck out here with the traffic. It's going to take a while." Clara's fingers tightened around the steering wheel. She wanted to argue, but she didn't have the energy. "Fine," she muttered, "just don't take too long." The mechanic gave another nod, his expression unreadable as he began to inspect the engine. Clara watched him through her rearview mirror, tapping her foot impatiently. His movements were deliberate, almost methodical, as his hands worked with a quiet expertise. She noticed the way he touched the car's parts, gently, but confidently. As if he knew exactly where to press, where to pull. The minutes stretched on, and Clara's frustration grew. She glanced at her watch, then checked her phone again. No signal. The mechanic hadn't said much since he began working, but his presence in the rearview mirror was a reminder that she was stuck. Her mind wandered back to her presentation, the deal she had been preparing for over the past week. It was the kind of opportunity that could change everything, put her career on the map. She couldn't afford to miss it. A strange noise came from the engine, followed by a faint whirring sound. Clara jumped slightly in her seat, startled. She hadn't expected the mechanic to be so thorough. She expected him to just fix the immediate issue, not spend time inspecting every detail. She was about to roll her window back down to ask him what was taking so long when the car gave a sudden jerk, as if it had come to life. The engine sputtered, groaned, and then, as if it had given its final breath, the car completely shut off. Clara's stomach dropped. She couldn't believe it. The car was dead, completely dead. The kind of dead where nothing worked, not even the lights. She was stuck, stranded in the middle of the city with no way to get anywhere. And no tow truck in sight. Her breath quickened, panic setting in as she grabbed her phone again, trying to call roadside assistance. This time, the call didn't even go through. She looked back at the mechanic. He hadn't even flinched when the engine died. What happened? She demanded, her voice shaking slightly. The mechanic didn't answer at first. He just walked around to the front of the car and popped open the hood with a calm, practiced movement. Clara could see him working with ease, his hands moving over the engine with a confidence that unsettled her. "There's a problem with the ignition system," he finally said, his voice low but clear. "You need it fixed before you can drive this anywhere." Clara stared at him, speechless. Her mind raced, and she felt an embarrassing mix of anger and helplessness bubbling up. "I don't have time for this," she said sharply. "I need to get to a meeting, and I can't afford to waste hours here." The mechanic glanced at her, his expression still calm. "You'll waste more time trying to fix it yourself or getting someone else out here. Trust me. It'll be better if you let me handle it now." Clara opened her mouth to protest, but something in the way he spoke made her stop. There was no arrogance in his voice, no condescension. He was simply stating the facts. After a long pause, Clara slumped back in her seat. "Fine," she muttered, "but make it quick." And so he did. The mechanic worked with a focus and efficiency that amazed her. His hands moved with such speed and precision, but there was no rush. Every motion was measured. Every turn of the wrench seemed to bring him closer to the solution. Clara couldn't help but watch him. Her impatience had given way to a grudging respect. She had initially dismissed him, judged him based on his appearance, but now, as she watched him work, she realized how little she had known about him. He wasn't just some random mechanic. He was skilled, knowledgeable, and calm under pressure. Everything Clara had prided herself on being, but in a way that was completely unexpected. In just a couple of hours, he had fixed her car, not just fixed it, but made it better. The engine hummed smoothly, almost as if it had never been in distress. Clara stared at the mechanic as he wiped his hands with a rag, finally stepping back and handing her the bill. She looked at the amount, shocked. It was far more than she expected, but there was something more pressing in her mind. She turned to him, her voice quieter now, a little embarrassed. "I didn't think you could do it." The mechanic simply smiled, a small, knowing smile. "I know what I'm doing," he said. "It's not about what you think of me. It's about what I can do." Clara nodded, her face flush with a mixture of gratitude and regret. She had been wrong. And now, she couldn't help but wonder, what else had she missed by judging him so quickly? What else was there about him she hadn't bothered to see? As she handed him the payment, the weight of the encounter settled in her chest. She had underestimated him, and in that moment, she realized something far deeper than just a mechanic fixing her car. The truth was, the story had only just begun. The car hummed to life as Clara pressed the accelerator, the smooth purr of the engine reminding her just how close she had come to disaster. Her fingers gripped the steering wheel tightly, the taste of humiliation still fresh on her tongue. As she maneuvered through the city, her mind churned with thoughts of the mechanic, how he had managed to fix her car so quickly, so effortlessly. She couldn't stop thinking about it. The whole situation was strange. A random mechanic, dressed in dirty overalls, had not only fixed a car that had seemed beyond repair but had done so in a way that felt almost too easy. Clara knew engines, or at least she had an idea of what went into them. The job he did was more than just competent, it was skilled. So why had she been so quick to dismiss him? Why had she been so quick to assume that a man in worn-out clothes, a stranger in the street, didn't deserve her trust? She found herself glancing at the rearview mirror again, but the mechanic was no longer in sight. She had driven off so quickly, eager to get away from the awkwardness of the encounter. Yet the mystery lingered, tugging at her with an intensity she couldn't ignore. Her phone buzzed in her hand, snapping her from her thoughts. A reminder popped up on the screen, client meeting in 30 minutes. Clara cursed under her breath. She had barely made it in time, and with the time wasted on her car troubles, she was pushing it. Despite her stress, she couldn't shake the feeling of unease. The mechanic's calmness, his quiet confidence, had unsettled her in a way she couldn't fully understand. It wasn't just that he had fixed her car. It was that something about the entire encounter felt like he had known exactly what she needed before she did. She checked the time again. Only 25 minutes to go. Clara needed to focus. No more distractions. She had a meeting to close the deal. She pushed aside any lingering thoughts of the mechanic and turned her attention to the task at hand. Clara arrived at her office building with mere minutes to spare. Her assistant greeted her at the door, handing her a stack of paperwork for the meeting. Clara straightened her jacket, walked into the elevator, and ascended to the 15th floor, where the meeting would take place. The entire time, her thoughts were still clouded by the encounter with the mechanic. The client, a wealthy real estate mogul, was already sitting in the meeting room when Clara walked in. She greeted him with her usual professional demeanor, and they quickly began discussing terms for a lucrative contract. But even as Clara presented her pitch, her mind wandered. The mechanic's face kept flashing before her eyes, his quiet gaze still lingering in her thoughts. What was it about him that made him so memorable? Was it the way he fixed her car so effortlessly? Or was there something else? Something she had missed? The meeting dragged on, but Clara couldn't seem to focus entirely. Every time she spoke, the words felt rehearsed, as if they weren't coming from her. It wasn't until the client asked her to explain her vision for a new project that Clara finally snapped out of her haze. "What about the new developments in the downtown area?" he asked, leaning forward in his chair, his sharp eyes studying her. Clara blinked, trying to regain her composure. "Well," she began, "we've seen a lot of growth in the city's commercial district. The properties are ripe for development, and we plan to secure a few major deals in the next few months. The timing is perfect for expansion." She went on, the words flowing more naturally now. She was back in her element. The client nodded slowly. Clara was good at this, closing deals, creating opportunities, but for the first time, she felt a flicker of doubt. The meeting ended with a handshake, but the feeling in the pit of her stomach didn't dissipate. She had done well, yes, but something wasn't right. Something was missing. Clara sat in her car again, this time in a parking garage beneath the office building. The day had been a whirlwind, and she was finally alone, but she still couldn't shake the feeling that something had changed. She leaned back in the driver's seat, staring at the ceiling of the garage as she let out a sigh. It wasn't until she reached for her purse that she noticed the note. A small, folded piece of paper was tucked under her windshield wiper. It hadn't been there when she parked earlier. Clara's heart skipped a beat as she pulled it out carefully, unfolding it with trembling fingers. You owe me for more than just fixing your car. I can help you with your biggest challenge. Meet me at the old warehouse near the docks at 8 p.m. tonight. You'll understand when you get there. Don't bring anyone. Clara stared at the note in disbelief. What the hell was this? She quickly glanced around the parking garage, but it was empty, save for a few parked cars. No one had been nearby when she got in the car, and the note hadn't been there before. Was it a joke? A prank? Or was it something more? Her mind raced as she tried to make sense of it. She didn't know anyone who could have left it. The only person she'd interacted with today, besides her clients and colleagues, was the mechanic. Clara's gut told her she should ignore it, forget about it. But at the same time, a strange curiosity gnawed at her. What was this man trying to tell her? Why had he left this note? The more she thought about it, the more the intrigue seemed to grow. She glanced at her watch, 5:30 p.m. She had a few hours to decide what to do. It was an unexpected mystery, one that felt far too personal to ignore. By the time the sun began to dip below the horizon, Clara found herself standing in front of a dilapidated warehouse at the edge of the docks. The cold night air bit at her skin as she glanced around. The area was deserted, the sounds of the city far behind her. There was something eerie about the place, and Clara's heart pounded in her chest. What had she gotten herself into? The note had been clear, don't bring anyone. And so, she hadn't. Clara had driven here alone, her mind swirling with doubts. But something inside her had compelled her to come. What was it? The feeling that she was missing something? Or was it the mechanic's confidence that she couldn't shake off? Clara stood at the entrance to the warehouse, her footsteps echoing on the pavement as she slowly approached the door. She hesitated, her hand resting on the handle. She could turn back now. No one would know. But the curiosity, no, the need to understand what was happening, was overwhelming. With a deep breath, she pushed the door open. Inside, the warehouse was dark and cold. The dim light from a single overhead bulb flickered in the corner. Shadows stretched across the floor, and Clara could hear the sound of her own breath as she stepped further into the building. "Hello?" she called out, her voice wavering slightly. From the shadows, a figure emerged. Clara's heart skipped a beat as she recognized him immediately. It was the mechanic. He stood there, his arms crossed, watching her with a steady gaze. "I knew you'd come." Clara's breath caught in her throat. "Why?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. "Why did you leave me that note? What do you want from me?" The mechanic stepped closer, his face unreadable. "It's not about what I want," he said, his voice calm but intense. "It's about what you need. You've been running away from it, but now you have no choice but to face it." Clara felt a chill run down her spine as she processed his words. She didn't know what he meant, but something told her this wasn't just about a car repair. It was something bigger. Something she wasn't ready for. Clara's mind was a whirl of confusion and fear as she stood facing the mechanic in the abandoned warehouse. The faint hum of distant city traffic was the only sound breaking the suffocating silence. His dark eyes locked onto hers, calm, intense, and filled with something she couldn't quite place, something she knew she should have recognized from the very first moment they'd met. "Why am I here?" Clara's voice trembled slightly as she asked the question that had been on her mind since the moment she received the note. "What do you want from me?" The mechanic, who had not yet offered his name, slowly stepped closer, the faint sound of his boots against the concrete floor echoing in the otherwise empty space. He had a presence that was difficult to ignore, an almost hypnotic calm that seemed to fill the air around him. "You've been running from this," he said, his voice steady, though there was an underlying edge to it that sent a shiver down Clara's spine. "But now you have to face it. It's not just about fixing your car. It never was." Clara felt her heart race in her chest, her breath shallow. This wasn't what she expected. This was not a simple mechanic showing off his talents or giving her a bit of advice. There was something far deeper at play here, and it terrified her. "Face what?" she managed to whisper, her hands trembling at her sides. The mechanic didn't answer right away. Instead, he looked around the warehouse, his eyes scanning the vast, empty space as if he were looking for something specific. For a moment, Clara wondered if he even intended to answer her question at all. She fought the urge to turn and run. This had gone far beyond an awkward encounter and into something far more dangerous. Finally, he spoke again, though this time his tone was softer, almost as if he were choosing his words carefully. "There are things about you, things about your past, that you haven't confronted. You keep hiding from them, pretending they don't matter. But they do, Clara. They matter more than you think." Clara felt as though the ground had just shifted beneath her. His words struck her with a force she wasn't prepared for. How did he know her name? How could he know anything about her past? She had kept everything hidden, carefully locked away. She had spent her entire life curating a perfect image, one that the world would accept, one that she could hold up to the light without ever revealing the cracks beneath it. "Who are you?" she asked, her voice now sharp with a mix of frustration and fear. "How do you know all of this?" The mechanic's gaze softened slightly, though it didn't lose its intensity. "You're not the first person I've helped, Clara. I'm not just a mechanic. I'm a catalyst. I make people face things they've been running from. And you, Clara, have been running for far too long." Clara recoiled at his words, feeling as though he had just peeled back the very layers she had spent years constructing. "I don't need your help. I don't need anyone's help," she snapped, trying to regain some control of the situation. She backed away slightly, her eyes darting to the door. The urge to flee was overwhelming, but she couldn't move. Something inside her told her that this was no accident. This moment was something she couldn't avoid, no matter how much she wanted to. The mechanic seemed to sense her unease, but instead of backing off, he pressed forward. "You do need help, Clara. You need help confronting the things you've buried deep inside you. And whether you like it or not, you can't keep ignoring it forever." Clara's pulse quickened. The walls around her began to feel like they were closing in. Her breath hitched in her chest, and she felt her throat tighten with a growing sense of panic. "I don't know what you're talking about," she said, trying to keep her voice steady, but it was becoming harder and harder to hide the fear. "I've never asked for help. I've worked hard to get where I am. I've built everything from the ground up." A harsh laugh escaped the mechanic's lips, though it wasn't mocking. "That's exactly it, Clara. You've built everything. But it's not real. You've constructed a life full of false promises, but now it's all coming crashing down." Clara felt a wave of anger surge through her, trying to mask the panic rising within her. "You don't know anything about me," she snapped, her eyes flashing as she glared at him. "You're just a mechanic. You fix cars. You don't know anything about my life, my choices, or who I am." For a moment, the mechanic didn't respond. He just stood there, his eyes never leaving hers. Then, in a voice so quiet that it almost sounded like a whisper, he said, "You're not the person you think you are." Clara's breath caught in her throat. She could feel the tension in her chest growing with each passing second. The words he spoke felt like daggers, each one more painful than the last. There was no denying it, something deep inside her was beginning to unravel, and she was powerless to stop it. She had always believed that her success had been earned through hard work, through determination, through carefully controlled choices. But now, this man, the mechanic who had walked into her life as if by chance, was forcing her to confront something she had buried long ago. Something she had worked so hard to forget. She shook her head, trying to clear the growing fog of confusion. "I don't know what you're talking about," she repeated, her voice quieter now, though it lacked conviction. She wasn't sure if she was trying to convince him or herself. "Let me show you," he said softly. "Let me show you the truth." Before she could react, the mechanic moved to the far corner of the warehouse, where a dusty old table sat beneath a single hanging light. Clara watched as he moved aside a large canvas, revealing a stack of old photographs. Her heart skipped a beat as she saw the familiar images staring back at her. The photographs were of her. Her younger self. The woman in the pictures was a far cry from the polished professional Clara had become. The girl in the photos was full of hope and energy, but her eyes were filled with a kind of uncertainty, a vulnerability that Clara had long ago buried. There were images of her at family gatherings, at school dances, and at the beach. But the most unsettling picture was one of Clara standing on a dock, much like the one outside the warehouse, looking out at the horizon with a somber expression. "How did you get these?" Clara asked, her voice trembling. She had no memory of ever seeing these pictures before. No memory of ever allowing them to exist. "What is this?" The mechanic stepped closer, his eyes never leaving hers. "This is who you were, Clara. This is who you've forgotten. You've tried to erase this part of your life, but you can't escape it. It's a part of you, whether you like it or not." Clara felt her legs buckle beneath her, and she leaned against the table for support. The images were a painful reminder of the life she had abandoned. The girl in the photos seemed so far removed from the woman she had become. It was as though someone had taken all her memories and painted over them with a new identity. A stronger, more confident identity. But it wasn't real. "Why are you doing this?" Clara whispered, her voice barely audible. "What do you want from me?" The mechanic's gaze softened for the first time. "I want you to wake up, Clara. I want you to understand that you've been hiding from yourself. You've been running from who you really are, and it's time to face the truth." Clara's head was spinning. She felt as though she were drowning, unable to breathe or think clearly. "I don't want to face the truth," she whispered, more to herself than to him. "I can't." The mechanic stepped forward, his presence looming over her as he spoke the words that would change everything. "You can't run anymore, Clara. Not from your past, and not from your future. It's time to make a choice." Clara closed her eyes, her heart pounding in her chest. The weight of his words pressed down on her, suffocating her. She had spent so many years hiding behind a mask of perfection, and now the cracks were beginning to show. The mechanic's voice cut through the silence. "You have two choices: continue to live in the shadow of your past, or step into the light and embrace who you really are." Clara's breath hitched as she slowly opened her eyes. She was at a crossroads, a moment that would define the rest of her life. But no matter which path she chose, there was no going back. The truth had found its way into her life, and now she had to face it, head on. Clara's heart pounded in her chest, every beat like the ticking of a clock counting down the moments of her life. She could feel the weight of the mechanic's words pressing against her ribs, suffocating her, crushing her under the force of their implication. There was no denying it anymore. Her carefully constructed world, the life she had built from the ground up, was about to unravel. The warehouse was quiet, save for the distant hum of traffic outside. The photos on the table seemed to loom over her, mocking her attempts to hide from the truth. She wanted to look away, to ignore the painful memories that these photographs had dredged up, but she couldn't. They were a mirror, reflecting a version of herself she had long buried. The mechanic stood before her, his dark eyes never leaving hers. He hadn't moved an inch since he revealed the photographs, and Clara could feel his presence like a weight in the room. He was waiting for her response, and the silence between them was thick, almost suffocating. She couldn't breathe. "You don't understand," she whispered, more to herself than to him. "You don't know what it's like to live with that kind of shame." The word tasted bitter on her tongue. "To feel like you're constantly pretending, constantly hiding who you really are." I've worked my whole life to escape from that girl in those photos. I've built something better, something real. The mechanic didn't respond immediately. Instead, he walked toward her, his footsteps echoing in the stillness of the warehouse. Clara watched him warily, her hands gripping the edge of the table, her knuckles white. When he reached her, he stopped just short of touching her, as if giving her the space she needed, but his presence was still overwhelming. "Shame," he repeated softly, his voice carrying a note of disbelief. "You think this is about shame?" Clara met his gaze, her lips pressed into a tight line. She didn't speak, but the intensity of her stare was enough to answer his question. The mechanic shook his head slowly. "Clara, this isn't about shame. This is about truth. You've been running from it for so long, but you can't hide from it forever. The shame you feel, it's not your own. It's something you inherited. Something placed on you by people who never understood you." Clara felt a pang in her chest, a sharp ache that seemed to tear at the very core of her being. She had spent her entire life trying to prove herself, trying to make up for a past she could never escape. The girl in those photographs, she was a stranger to her now. That girl was weak, vulnerable, and broken. But Clara had worked so hard to build a new identity, one that was strong and in control. She had buried the past and moved on, never looking back. Until now. The mechanic's words resonated within her, and she felt the foundations of her carefully constructed world begin to shake. Was it possible that everything she had believed about herself was wrong? Could it be that the life she had built was built on a lie? "I don't know what you want me to do," Clara said, her voice barely more than a whisper. She closed her eyes, trying to steady her breath, but the emotions that had been bubbling under the surface for so long were threatening to spill over. "I've spent my whole life trying to forget. Trying to be someone else. I can't just go back. I can't face that person again. I can't be her." The mechanic's gaze softened, though it remained firm. "You don't have to become her again. You don't have to go back. But you do need to understand that the person you've become is built on a false foundation. You can't keep running from the truth. It's always going to be there, no matter how far you go." Clara opened her eyes, staring at the mechanic as if seeing him for the first time. She had been so sure of herself, so certain of the path she had chosen, but now she wasn't so sure. She had fought so hard to escape the past, to leave behind the girl she once was, but the past had a way of catching up with her. And this man, this mechanic, was forcing her to confront it. "I can't change who I am," Clara whispered, her voice breaking. "I can't go back." The mechanic took a step closer, his voice gentle but unwavering. "I'm not asking you to change who you are. I'm asking you to embrace who you truly are. To stop hiding behind the walls you've built. To stop pretending that you don't have scars. Because those scars, Clara, they're a part of you. They make you who you are. And until you accept that, you'll never be free." The words hit her like a wave, crashing over her with a force she wasn't prepared for. She had spent her entire life pretending. Pretending to be strong. Pretending to be confident. Pretending to be someone she wasn't. And now, this man, this stranger, was telling her that all of it had been a lie. He was telling her that the truth was buried deep within her, but she had to face it before she could truly move forward. "I don't know if I can," Clara admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "I don't know if I'm strong enough." The mechanic's gaze softened further, and for the first time, Clara saw something in his eyes, something more than just determination. There was empathy there. Understanding. "You don't have to be strong, Clara," he said quietly. "You just have to be willing to see the truth. That's all." Clara stood there for a long moment, the weight of his words pressing down on her. She felt a deep sense of conflict churning inside her, a battle between the life she had built and the truth she had been hiding from. Could she face the past? Could she confront the things she had buried so deep that even she had forgotten them? She felt like she was standing at a crossroads, with two paths stretching out before her. One path led to the life she had created, a life of success, of power, of control. The other path led into the unknown, into a world of vulnerability and pain, where the truth could no longer be ignored. And yet, as much as she wanted to run away, to continue hiding from the past, something deep inside her told her that she couldn't. She had to choose. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, Clara took a deep breath and spoke the words that would change everything. "I'm ready," she said, her voice steady but soft. "I'm ready to face the truth." The mechanic nodded, a faint smile crossing his lips. "Good. You'll find that it's not as scary as you think." Clara felt a strange sense of relief wash over her, as if a weight had been lifted from her shoulders. She didn't know what the future held, but for the first time in years, she felt like she was on the right path. She didn't have all the answers, but she was no longer afraid to seek them. The mechanic turned and began walking toward the exit, his footsteps sure and steady. "Come on," he said, without looking back. "There's more to this story than you realize." Clara hesitated for a moment. But then, without a second thought, she followed him. The door to the warehouse creaked open, and she stepped out into the cool night air, the weight of the past still heavy on her shoulders, but no longer controlling her. As they walked away from the warehouse, Clara felt something shift within her. The choice she had made wasn't easy, but it was the first step toward something real. Something true. She didn't know where this journey would lead, but for the first time in a long time, she was ready to find out. Clara walked alongside the mechanic, her footsteps slow and hesitant as the cold night air brushed against her skin. The city was quiet now, the sounds of the bustling streets fading into the background as they ventured deeper into an unknown part of town. The warehouse was far behind them now, the heavy door creaking shut as if sealing off a part of her past that she had left behind. But it wasn't enough. No matter how far she walked, no matter how fast she tried to escape, the past was following her like a shadow. And the mechanic, this strange, enigmatic figure, was the one who had forced her to see it. "Where are we going?" Clara asked, her voice uncertain as she glanced up at the mechanic, who was walking a few steps ahead, his gaze fixed ahead. "You're not ready yet," he said without looking at her, his tone distant but calm. "But you will be soon." Clara didn't know if she should be grateful for the distance between them or frustrated by it. For weeks now, ever since she had first met him, her life had been slowly unraveling, thread by thread. He had shown her the truth, pieces of it, at least, but every time she thought she was ready to move forward, the weight of her past would pull her back. She had chosen to confront the truth. She had made that decision when she walked out of the warehouse with him, but now that they were walking into the unknown, she felt an overwhelming sense of doubt creeping in. Was she truly ready? What if facing the truth meant losing everything she had worked so hard to build? Her mind raced with 1,000 questions, but she kept them to herself. She didn't want to seem weak, not in front of him. She couldn't let him see how uncertain she was. She had come this far, and there was no turning back now. They turned down a dark alley, the walls of nearby buildings casting long shadows on the ground. Clara's breath caught in her throat. She had never been in this part of town before, and it felt wrong, unfamiliar. Her instinct was to turn around, to run back to the safety of her life, the life she had worked so hard to construct, but she stayed, each step forward feeling heavier than the last. The mechanic stopped in front of a large, unmarked building. The door was old, weathered by time, and it looked like it hadn't been touched in years. Yet there was something about it that felt purposeful. Clara could feel her heart racing, her palms growing clammy. Clara could feel her heart racing, her palms growing clammy. She had no idea what lay beyond that door, but something told her that whatever it was, it would change everything. "This is it," the mechanic said, his voice low and steady. He looked at her for the first time since they had left the warehouse, his expression unreadable. Everything you've been running from. Everything you've been hiding from. It's in there. Clara swallowed hard, her throat dry. She didn't know if she was more terrified of what was inside the building or what was already inside her mind. You don't have to do this, the mechanic added, his voice softer now. You can still walk away. But if you do, nothing will ever change. Clara stood frozen, her eyes locked on the door. Her heart was beating so loudly that she could hear it in her ears, drowning out the sound of the wind. She had spent so much time running from her past, from the mistakes she had made, from the things she had buried so deep that they no longer seemed real. But now, standing here in front of this door, she realized that she had no choice. If she truly wanted to move forward, if she truly wanted to be free, she had to face it all. Every last bit of it. I'm ready, Clara whispered, her voice trembling slightly but firm. The mechanic nodded and reached for the door handle, pushing it open with a low creak. The dim light inside flickered to life as the door swung wide, revealing a room filled with old boxes, dusty furniture, and forgotten memories. But in the far corner, Clara saw something that made her blood run cold. A large mirror, its surface cracked and warped, stood against the wall. And in front of the mirror stood a figure. Her. Clara's breath caught in her throat. The reflection in the mirror was unmistakable, herself, but not the woman she had become. This was the girl from the photographs. The one she had tried to forget. The girl who had been lost, confused, and vulnerable. The girl she had locked away and hidden from the world. The reflection stared back at her, its eyes filled with sorrow and regret. Clara took a hesitant step forward, drawn to the mirror as if it were pulling her in. She could feel her heart beating faster as she approached, the weight of the past pressing down on her chest. Every memory she had buried, every fear she had ignored, was rising to the surface, forcing her to confront it. Look at her, the mechanic's voice broke through the silence. This is who you were. And this is who you need to accept before you can move forward. Clara shook her head, her hands trembling as she reached for the mirror. I can't. I can't look at her. I don't want to be her anymore. You can't hide from her forever, Clara, the mechanic said gently. She's a part of you. You need to face her. If you don't, you'll never be free. Clara's fingers brushed the cracked surface of the mirror, and for a moment, everything went still. The rustle of wind against the trees, they all seemed somehow distant, as if the world had shifted and she was seeing it through new eyes. The mechanic, who had led her on this strange and terrifying journey, stood behind her, his shadow falling long across the pavement. She could feel his presence without needing to turn around, and she knew that this was the moment. The moment when everything would change. She had confronted the mirror in the abandoned warehouse. She had confronted her past. And though it had been painful, excruciating, even, she had walked away with a sense of peace that she hadn't felt in years. For the first time in a long time, Clara felt as if she had broken free from the chains she had forged herself. The girl in the mirror, her younger self, was not a stranger. She was a part of her. The vulnerability, the mistakes, the fears, those had shaped Clara into the woman she had become. And now, she understood. She understood that she could no longer hide from those pieces of herself. They were integral to her identity, and they always had been. The idea that she could run from them had been a lie. But the hardest part was still ahead of her. Now that she had faced the past, she had to decide what to do with the knowledge. What path would she take now that the weight of her past no longer defined her? Would she continue the life she had built, one founded on fear and control, or would she forge something new, something real? The mechanic's footsteps echoed softly behind her, and Clara finally turned to face him. The moonlight illuminated his face, casting deep shadows beneath his eyes. There was no judgment in his gaze, only quiet understanding. I've shown you what I can, he said, his voice steady and calm, but there was a depth in it that spoke to something beyond simple words. Now it's your turn. You've come so far, but you need to take the next step on your own. Clara looked at him, her heart heavy with the weight of the decision before her. She had spent her whole life building a fortress around herself, walls of perfection, of success, of control. But now, the cracks were showing. And those cracks had given way to something new. Something uncertain. But something real. "Do you think I'm ready?" she asked, her voice raw and vulnerable. The words felt foreign coming from her mouth. She had never allowed herself to ask for help. She had never allowed herself to admit that she wasn't in control. But now, in this moment, it felt like the only honest question to ask. The mechanic didn't answer right away. Instead, he looked at her for a long moment, his gaze steady and unwavering. Finally, he spoke. "You've always been ready," he said softly. "You just needed to see it. You needed to understand that the strength you've been searching for isn't in perfection. It's in acceptance. In vulnerability." Clara nodded slowly, absorbing his words. The strength she had always admired in others. Had always tried to mimic, had always been there, deep inside her. She had just been too afraid to let it show. To let others see the cracks. To let herself see the cracks. But now, as she stood in the moonlight, the weight of her past behind her and the world ahead, she felt something shift within her. It wasn't a sudden, dramatic change. It wasn't an epiphany that would change everything in an instant. It was quieter than that. A deep, subtle shift that opened the door to possibilities she had never considered before. "I'm not sure where to go from here," Clara admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "I don't know what's next." The mechanic smiled faintly, a glimmer of warmth in his otherwise serious demeanor. "That's the beauty of it. You don't have to know. You just have to take the first step." Clara stood still for a moment, letting the weight of his words settle in her mind. The first step. It sounded so simple. And yet, for years, she had been avoiding that first step. She had been afraid of what might come after, afraid that she wouldn't be able to handle it. But now, she knew that the hardest part was already behind her. Now, she was free to walk toward whatever came next. And for the first time, she was ready to do so. "I'm ready," she said, more to herself than to him. The words felt strong, sure, as if they had come from a place deep within her. The mechanic nodded, his gaze softening. "I'll leave you now. But remember, you're never alone in this. You have everything you need inside you. Just trust yourself." With that, he turned and began to walk away, his figure blending into the shadows. Clara watched him go, a strange sense of gratitude filling her chest. He had been the guide she needed, the catalyst for the change she had been avoiding for so long. But now, the path was hers to walk. For a long moment, Clara stood there, alone in the quiet of the night, the world stretching out before her. She could feel the uncertainty of the future pressing against her, but this time, it didn't feel like a threat. It felt like a possibility. She didn't know what was coming. She didn't know what choices she would have to make or what obstacles would stand in her way. But she was no longer afraid. For the first time in a long time, Clara felt free. Free to make her own mistakes, free to build something new, free to live without the constant weight of fear pressing down on her shoulders. Clara took a deep breath, filling her lungs with the crisp air, and began to walk. It wasn't a dramatic step. It wasn't some grand moment of transformation. It was simply the first step into a new life. A life she would build not on perfection or control, but on honesty and acceptance. A life where she could be vulnerable, where she could be real. And for the first time, she was okay with that. Weeks later, Clara sat in her office, her fingers typing away at the keyboard as she worked on a new proposal. Her phone buzzed on the desk, and she glanced at it. It was a message from her assistant, confirming the time for her next meeting. It was just another day in the corporate world, and yet, Clara felt different. lighter. As though the weight of her past had been lifted, leaving her room to breathe, to grow. Her office was as polished as it had always been, the walls lined with awards and accolades. But now, when Clara looked around, she saw something different. These weren't just symbols of success. They were reminders of how far she had come. And they weren't what defined her anymore. She was no longer trying to prove something to anyone. She was no longer hiding behind her achievements. Clara's thoughts were interrupted by a knock on the door, and her assistant entered with a folder in hand. Clara looked up, offering a warm smile. "What's the update?" she asked, eager to dive back into the work that had always been her refuge. As her assistant began explaining the details of the meeting, Clara's mind wandered for just a moment. She thought about the mechanic, how his quiet wisdom had set her on this path. He had been the key to unlocking the door to her true self. And though she hadn't seen him since that night, she knew his words would stay with her. "You've always been ready." Clara had taken the first step. And now, the rest of her life was waiting.